Yes, hello, welcome back to the Rugby League Forecast podcast. My name is Connor Moran, and this is episode 2 on YouTube, but we're close to 20 episodes now on Spotify. Over the last few days, I've done best 5'8", best centres, best wingers, best fullbacks, but today I'll be reviewing the best halfbacks from the NRL era from 1998 to 2025, and this one was very hard, and I actually don't know if there will be a harder one than this. Quite controversial. I think most people will have the same halfback at number 1. Pretty confident. But 2, 3, 4, I really struggled with. So I've taken representative career into consideration when doing this as well. So let's get started. So at number 3, the best halfback I've got, or the third best halfback I've got, is Cooper Cronk from the Melbourne Storm and the Sydney Roosters. So he debuted at the Melbourne Storm in 2004. I'm pretty sure he was a winger, a centre or a winger, and then they transformed him into a halfback and ended up being one of the best halfbacks the game has ever seen. Yesterday, I spoke about James Maloney as a winner. Wherever he went, they won. Well, the same goes with Cooper Cronk. Whatever jersey he wore, they pretty much won almost everything, whether it be Australian World Cups, Queensland Origin Dynasty. He was part of that, a big part of that, coming off the bench for many of those years in that number 14 jersey. But what he did for Melbourne and the Sydney Roosters, honestly, absolutely unbelievable. Let's go through his career right now. So in 2005, Matt Orford is the previous halfback for the Melbourne Storm. And Matt Orford was there in 2005. He then gets a very good offer from the Manly Sea Eagles and Des Hasler, who at the time were captained by Michael Monaghan. They had also just brought in Ben Kennedy for the 2005 season, but they just were missing a bit of X factor in the halves. So Manly offered Matt Orford a good deal, and he took that up. So Melbourne all of a sudden were looking for a halfback, and they did what they did best, and that is to get the best out of a player that no one really saw coming. They certainly did that with Cooper Cronk. At the beginning of the 2006 season, Cooper Cronk was given the number 7 jersey, and by the end of that season, they're in a grand final, and that doesn't surprise me at all. Looking back at Cooper Cronk's career, he was a winner from a very, very young age. So as I mentioned, debuted in, I'm going to say 2004, 2005 they make the finals, 2006. End of 2005, Matt Orford leaves to Manly. 2006, the number 7 is now Cooper Cronk for many, many years at the Melbourne Storm. Dominant player, the ultimate conductor in the halfback position. What a player he was. 2006, they get beaten by the Brisbane Broncos. I'm going to say 15 points to 8. I think it was a 7-point margin. I'm pretty sure Darren Lockyer kicked a field goal in the last 10 minutes or something to ice it. But I might be wrong on that. But the Melbourne Storm, I know he kicked the field goal. I might be wrong about the score, but once again, great year in 2006. 2007, they make the grand final. Now, in saying this, from 2005 to 2010, until they got caught over the salary cap, that squad was over the salary cap for that amount of years and did receive a lot of success, right? But if I'm just ultimately analysing the career of Cooper Cronk and what he achieved at that club, it was pretty phenomenal. 2007, they're in a grand final. They beat Manly in the grand final, stripped. Just reminding everybody. 2008, he actually is the captain of that grand final. Cameron Smith gets suspended in the semi-final, doing a grapple tackle, I think it was, on Sam Thaiday, and he gets suspended for that game. So he's the captain of 2008, Cameron Smith. He gets suspended. Cooper Cronk now the captain of Melbourne going into that grand final. So his third year in that 7 jersey, he's now the captain in front of just over 80,000 fans. So pretty phenomenal there. 2009 premiership winner, beating the Parramatta Eels at ANZ Stadium. 2010, they get called over the salary cap. But um, yes, personally, I believe all those premierships needed to be stripped off. But in saying that, you can't take away the talent and the leadership that some of those players brought to the side, including Cooper Cronk. I think later on in his career, it showed that he was a true champion and a born winner. I think it's fair to say. 2011, they get all the way back to a prelim final and lose in the final minute to Sean Johnson's floating pass to Lewis Brown, who scores for the Warriors and gets them to the 2011 grand final. But they were knocked out in a prelim final. It was set up to be the decider, Game 3 Manly Melbourne grand final in the space of 4 years. But the Warriors upset Melbourne in Melbourne. It's actually one of the biggest upsets in rugby league NRL finals history. The Warriors did it also in 2008 against Melbourne in week 1 at Sydney Olympic Park with Michael Witt only just getting the football down. Ivan Cleary was the head coach then. But back to Cooper Cronk, a terrific player. 2012, this is the ultimate premiership. If you hear Billy Slater, Cooper Cronk, Cameron Smith and Craig Bellamy talk about what they achieved at the Melbourne Storm, they talk about 2012 being the best of them all. Technically, they only won in 2012, 2017, 2020, and of course in 1999. But to come back from that, from 2010, to come back from that, get to a prelim in 2011, and then win a premiership 2 years later. The way they rebuilt the club, and it took a matter of 2 years, unbelievable. I could not believe it. I remember being 16 years old when the Melbourne Storm got stripped. I remember watching David Gallup on the TV thinking, this club might fold. Like this is a big deal. They might actually have fans walk away. And it wasn't just me thinking that, like just the severity of the situation. I was only 16 years old and I thought that at the time, but then I remember rugby league journalists coming out saying the same thing. Like this could be a situation where the Melbourne Storm will no longer exist. Well, they proved everyone wrong and they won a premiership against the Canterbury Bulldogs in 2012. And in 2012, the Bulldogs got the minor premiership. So if you remember, players in that squad was a Dale Finucane, a James Graham just got there that year, playing his first year in the NRL. A young Josh Jackson, Michael Ennis was the captain, Josh Reynolds, Trent Hodkinson, Krishnan Inu, phenomenal side. Josh Morris in the centres, Ben Barber, Dally M Player of the Year in 2012, and Melbourne, they beat them. It was a really high quality game of football, but not many points were scored. I think maybe the score may have only been around 12 points to 4 in favour of Melbourne, something like that anyway. I may be wrong, but from memory, I don't know if there was a try scored in the second half. So pretty remarkable what they were able to achieve in 2 years. I think when we talk about Melbourne, we'd think, well, they're going to be successful. But I think sometimes we as rugby league fans and as a rugby league community forget just what they did in the space of 2 years to come back and win a competition. Like, I don't think we'd ever see anything like that again. And I hope we don't, because I don't want clubs cheating the salary cap. And, no one wants that. No rugby league fans want that. And no rugby league fans or anyone involved in rugby league deserves that. So that's why I'm very happy that, those premierships got stripped. And I'm a diehard Manly fan. And say in 2008 and 2011, if it came out that the Manly Sea Eagles were over the cap in those 2 years, a few years later, it would hurt me. It would sting me. But I would much rather have the premierships taken away, because it would not feel the same as a supporter. I remember there was talk in 2007 that, how about they hand the premierships to Manly and Parramatta for 2009, both runners up of that year. I remember thinking, no way. I couldn't think of anything worse, because I will always remember leaving that grandstand at ANZ Stadium in tears. Like, you can't just replace that feeling and go, oh yeah, all of a sudden they've won. Like, it doesn't work like that. So I'm just still complexed of how they actually achieved that, the Melbourne Storm. And I've got no doubt that they don't do that unless Cooper Cronk is involved in that 2012 roster. That try assist he set up, he put in a kick. I think it may have been to, what's his name? Justin O'Neill. Did he play for Melbourne? The centre? The winger? He may have played the wing. He may have played, I've got to check. Justin O'Neill, got to check that, double check that. Cooper Cronk put a beautiful crossfield kick in straight to the chest, finding Justin O'Neill, I think it was, to score for Melbourne. And then second try, one of the great grand final tries that, in my opinion, doesn't get replayed enough. An incredible try where Cooper Cronk just ran towards the line, 15 metres away, and it was just a dead set, no-look pass. It was robotic. It was actually freaky watching it live. Finding Billy Slater, he just knew exactly where Billy would be. And I remember Cooper Cronk talking a few years ago on Fox League about how those certain defenders in front of him and Slater trained for that exact play, because those certain defenders would always rush up. I think it may have been Josh Reynolds. They would always rush up and put pressure on Cooper Cronk as soon as he'd get his hands on the ball. But if he had a flying Slater wrapping around him with a no-look ball, then that's going to create the space on the inside. And honestly, what a freak of a player, Cooper Cronk. We go 2013, 2013, 2014, 2015. As a Melbourne fan, you probably look back at those as quite disappointing. I think in 2013 they got knocked out by the Knights in a semi-final, and then Newcastle went into a prelim against the Sydney Roosters. 2014, genuinely can't remember how Melbourne went in 2014. I know they made the finals, but I think I'm going to say they got knocked out second week of the semis. 2015. Cameron Smith didn't actually watch Jonathan Thurston's grand final, even though they're best mates, because he was so filthy that Melbourne didn't get to the grand final. And it was only Cameron Smith's wife that said, Cameron, you've got to watch this. JT's got to kick it to win it. And then he comes and watches the final 5 minutes of that game. Cooper Cronk, unbelievable. 2016, they get back to a grand final. And this is now without Billy Slater. This is now with Cameron Munster at fullback. And Cooper Cronk, his game, I always think from 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, his final 4 years of his NRL career went up a level. Before I talk about the 2016 grand final, I just want to go back to the 2012 decider with Cooper Cronk kicking the winning field goal. Still breaks my heart. That probably broke my heart more than when Darren Lockyer intercepted the ball in 2006. Got on that loose ball and just scored and won the game for Queensland. But Cooper Cronk, 40 metres out in a decider at Suncorp Stadium. What a kick. Unbelievable. One of the best field goals I've ever seen as a rugby league fan. It was just such a clutch moment from such a clutch player. Unbelievable, Cooper Cronk. But 2016 grand final, they get very close. And if Will Chambers passes the ball back on the inside with 9 minutes to go, Cooper Cronk scores and Melbourne probably win the game. I thought his game in 2016 was phenomenal in that grand final, Cooper Cronk. But Cronulla, as we know, and Andrew Fafita, just too good on that day. Sorry, I got the cockatoos flying above the Centre of Excellence studios. 2017 grand final. Now, this was the most dominant year I can remember from any side I've ever watched in the NRL. So we always talk about the Penrith Panthers, and I agree with it, being the best side of the NRL era. Absolutely, I agree. Like that 2022, 2023 Panthers sides probably, yeah. But the 2017 Melbourne Storm side, one of the best teams I have ever seen in rugby league history. Billy Slater came back from injury after 4 rounds, and you had Vunivalu and a young Josh Addo-Carr on the wings, and Will Chambers and Curtis Scott in the centres. And Munster then moves to 5'8" that year alongside Cooper Cronk at halfback. You had Jesse Bromwich, Cameron Smith, Jordan McLean, I think, was the front rower. Felice Kafusi, I'm pretty sure he was there, second row, 2017. Kenneth Bromwich, I'm going to say, was the number 12. And 13, I'm going to say Dale Finucane, and I'm going to say Nelson Sofa Solomona came on from the bench, but I may be wrong with those two. If I'm wrong, just leave it in the comments because I want to know if I'm wrong so I can learn from that because I like to know that stuff. I just love history of rugby league. I love it. So that side was just so dominant. I think they only lost about 4 or 5 games all year. And the amount of tries that they scored, the amount of points they scored, the amount of times they dominated in games. I remember in 2017, they actually versed Parramatta in week 1 of the finals. Parramatta showed up to Amy Park and they were there to play. And it was one of Mitchell Moses, one of his first few games in the Parramatta jersey. He played at the Tigers earlier that year and switched midway through. And he had a brilliant game with Gutherson in that semi-final. But Melbourne, they knew how to win big, but they knew how to win in a grind. They were such a dominant side because they knew how to win on every level. And they were able to adapt to a different game plan if they had to, without really needing a halftime speech from their coach. They already had 3 coaches on their side and, at the least 2 future immortals in Cameron Smith and Billy Slater. But Cooper Cronk, to me, unbelievable player. 2017 grand final, plays his last game for the Sydney Roosters, for the Melbourne Storm in 2017, has a press conference and announces that he's going to go to the Sydney Roosters. Actually, I think he announced that he's going to leave the Melbourne Storm and leave his NRL future up in the air. Then he goes to the Sydney Roosters 2018. Now, in the first half of the 2018 season, I'm going to say that Cooper Cronk really struggled. New club, new system, new players around him. There was no longer a Billy Slater, Cameron Smith. There was a James Tedesco playing his first year in Roosters colours. There was a Jake Friend. There was just a whole new system, whole new coach. He'd never been coached by another man in NRL before. He's had Craig Bellamy all the way from 2004 to 2017. So pretty remarkable, I've got to say, from Cooper Cronk. They end up winning the premiership. And if you told me at round 11, round 12, 2018, that the Roosters would end up winning the premiership, I'd say you're kidding yourself because they really struggled. It took them a long time. The criticism that the media were giving them, the amount of pressure that Cooper Cronk was under, no one knew what was going on. They thought that the combinations would click and click a lot quicker than what it did, but it didn't. It took about 10 to 12 weeks, and all of a sudden, when it clicked, it clicked. They just won so many games in a row, and they ended up winning that premiership 2018. Funnily enough, against the Melbourne Storm. And yeah, as we all know, what Cronk achieved in that 2018 grand final with his shoulder, he should not have played, really. But he did it. And I heard Luke Keary on a podcast not long ago, and he was talking about, I think he may have been on the buy round with James Graham, but he was talking about he didn't know until 24 hours before whether or not Cronk was most likely going to play. He was training as though he was going to be the number 7. And I'm glad he did because he ended up getting the Clive Churchill medal, Luke Keary. And he really was in that game. If you look at that game, Luke Keary really was the number 7 and the conductor of that game. Cronk was more, I've never seen a grand final before where he was involved to an extent, but it was more, he was just like a coach on the field. And the way he played the game, the way he had to adapt to the injury and give the boys confidence around him goes to show the champion of a player that Cooper Cronk really was. An absolute champion. 2019, they beat the Raiders in the grand final. They're a more dominant team in 2019 through the regular season. Their combinations had already clicked. And they were just a much better side. I remember them beating, I think it may have been the Broncos by a huge margin in 2019, but I'll have to double check that. But he then retires at the end of 2019, but he won World Club Challenges, won a World Cup for Australia in 2013 and 2017. Just an incredible player. He's my number 3. My God, I've just done 20 minutes and I've only spoken about one player. I better hurry it up. Jonathan Thurston, 2002, he debuted to 2018. Here's my 2nd. So 2015 grand final premiership winner is what we remember him for, but the 2004 grand final was his first premiership ring. Steve Price got injured in the preliminary final. I think Can't remember who they versed. Possibly Penrith. He got injured, broke his arm, and then Jonathan Thurston was actually getting on the piss a few days before the grand final until the Bulldogs coach, I think it was Steve Folkes, called JT in his office. And apparently Jonathan Thurston thought to himself, oh no, what am I doing in here? He was hungover and he said, you're going to be playing in the grand final because Steve Price is injured. You're the 18th man. You're coming in off the bench. He played the final stages of that 2004 grand final and kicked them out of trouble. Beautiful kick in the touch. And in a way, saved the game for the Bulldogs because the Roosters were coming back. And I watched that game a couple of weeks ago. I still cannot believe the Roosters did not win that grand final for Brad Fittler's farewell. They had all the opportunities in the world, but the Bulldogs were so good. And JT was a huge part of that premiership win. Sure, he didn't play for 80 minutes, but he was phenomenal. Jonathan Thurston, what he achieved in State of Origin as well, unbelievable. I don't think we've seen a more dominant player long term. Yes, Wally Lewis is the king of Origin, but the amount of games that JT played in the halves, phenomenal. I mean, you talk about Cameron Smith and Darren Lockyer, but Thurston to me is one of the kings of State of Origin. He just something about him in Origin. He never had a bad game. His debut in 2005, he kicked a field goal for Queensland to beat New South Wales. I'm going to say in game 105, that was Bowen's intercept. Yeah. So kicked a field goal to get them back in to Golden Point, and then Bowen gets the intercept. Yeah. So without Thurston's boot in that game, they don't come back and win that. Phenomenal player. Australian halfback for many years alongside Darren Lockyer, then moves to 5'8" on the second half of his career at representative level for Cooper Cronk to be the 7, Jonathan Thurston to be the number 6. But when I think about Jonathan Thurston, I always think of him as a 7. Just the way in which he was able to, I guess, create the moment. If it was Golden Point, you knew he was going to step up and do something. Not always the Cowboys won in Golden Point. From that 2014 to 2017 period between the Cowboys and the Broncos, the Cowboys didn't win every game, right? Milford kicked a field goal and, the Broncos won a few through that stage as well. But JT always tried something. He always, if he wasn't going to score a try, a try that was not allowed in the corner, he was going to be involved with a field goal or setting up Lachlan Coote for something. Just a tremendous player, Matt Bowen, Jonathan Thurston, but just on Matt Bowen, his combination with JT, phenomenal. Like JT and Matt Bowen were just two Indigenous kids doing their magic. It was such brilliance to watch and one of the most underrated combinations, I think. Yes, if you mention it, people know exactly what you're talking about. A lot of the time we hear about Steve Menzies and Cliff Lyons and the combination that existed for those many years at Manly, and so we should, because it is one of the best combinations. But just in my opinion, I don't think the combination between Jonathan Thurston and Matt Bowen gets spoken about enough. It was absolutely brilliant. Those two are absolutely phenomenal. So he's my second, of course, winning the 2015 premiership winning grand final with his boot. Thurston's got the field goal. He's got the premiership. He has gone from a captain to a legend to probably rugby league immortality. An absolute freak, Jonathan Thurston. Number 1, Andrew Joey Johns. He debuted in 1993, retired with a pretty serious neck injury halfway through the 2007 season. A one-club player for the Newcastle Knights, played for country, played for Australia. An incredible player. In my eyes, the best we've ever seen. And I remember watching pretty much 7-8 games every week from, I'd say, 2003, 2004 onwards. And so I reckon there was 3 or 4 years where I watched Andrew Johns play every week. And as a kid back then, I couldn't really read the game. I couldn't really understand. I knew how tries were scored and goals are, I knew the rules, but I couldn't really read the game being that young. But Andrew Johns, I look back at replays, the amount of games I've watched him perform. I'll never forget with Andrew Johns. I remember sitting as a kid at my old home with my dad in the lounge room, and Dad and I were just watching Game 2, 2005, and Dad was sitting on this black wheelie chair, I remember, just holding a long neck VB. just sipping away at Andrew Johns and what he was doing. And I just remember Dad getting up, always going to the toilet, and everything. Every time Andrew Johns did something, Dad would just get up and go, oh. He didn't know what to say. I just remember being 10 years old looking at Dad, and Dad would just go, oh, just back to the fridge, another beer, off to the toilet. Like, Dad was just silent. Dad and I like to talk through football sometimes, but that's one of the only games I've seen Dad just like not talk. He was blown away by what Andrew Johns was doing in that game to Origin 2005. It was unbelievable. Andrew Johns, one of the greatest players of all time, but you've got to say he's the best halfback there is in the NRL, and I don't think there's even a question. What he did in that 1997 grand final. Luckily, I was too young to even know what was going on then. I didn't even watch rugby league then, but if that happened now, this podcast would probably be suspended for two months, as I'd need some time to heal. No, honestly, he was absolutely just what he achieved in his career. Just, man, how good his kicking game. I remember a game against the Dragons in 2003 from the sideline. He had to win it at Newcastle. It went right over the black dot, and he just lifted up his arm, and it was almost like he knew he was going to get it, and there was no question about it. 2001, his grand final performance in that game was phenomenal. Ended up getting the 2001 Clive Churchill medal. And if you watch that 2001 grand final, what you'll notice is Johns' kicking game, especially in the first half, unbelievable. I don't think I've ever watched a grand final where you watch a halfback dominate the game so consistently. Yes, I mean, you've got Cleary in that 2023 grand final, but realistically, he didn't really start performing consistently until the final 16 minutes of that grand final. But for this, Andrew Johns dominated from the get-go. He led that side out to the 2001 grand final at Sydney Olympic Park, and Newcastle dominated on the back of Andrew Johns' kicking game. He controlled the game. I remember hearing Phil Gould on Six Tackles with Gus maybe 4 years ago on his podcast, and Parramatta apparently were the heavy favourites going into that game. Minor premiers, more points scored than any other side in the history of rugby league in a regular season. So they had the likes of Jason Taylor, a young Nathan Kalis, a young Jamie Lyon. Brett Hodgson was their fullback. I think maybe Scott Donald, future winger for Manly, may have been on the wing for them as well. Terrific lineup. Andrew Ryan, Bobcat Ryan. Man, they just had so many players, such an incredible side that lost. But apparently at the grand final breakfast, Phil Gould noticed the Parramatta players were extremely nervous and they looked frightened. And then he looked over at the Newcastle table, and the Knights players were drinking beers, having a laugh and just enjoying the moment. And that always stayed with me in terms of the body language, how you could pick up on who was more relaxed. And Phil Gould was able to on that day. And that always stayed with me, that story that Gus told a few years ago on his podcast, just about the way in which Newcastle just treated it like they were living in the moment and they're just going to enjoy it. Brian Smith, as a coach, I think he was the coach of the Dragons in 1992, 1993, lost both of those grand finals to Wayne Bennett's Broncos, gets to the 2001 grand final, lost that to Newcastle, heavy favourites Parramatta. Then they get to the 2010 grand final alongside he gets to the Roosters to the grand final. Did a terrific job. I'm pretty sure the Roosters got wooden spoon in 2009, and then he comes to the club and gets them up to 2010 grand final. So pretty remarkable. Even though he never won a premiership, Brian Smith, I still think he's one of the great coaches of rugby league. Absolutely. Andrew Johns. What else do I need to say? Incredible halfback, the best halfback, not of just the NRL era, but of rugby league since 1908. You do not get, I'm going to say, you don't get better. You do not get a better player. Now, you might be wondering why Nathan Cleary isn't in my top three. He would have been in my top three. I mean, how can I? It's hard to leave him out, right? He's won 4 premierships, 5 grand finals. He's won 3 or 4 Origin series, won a World Cup for Australia in 2022. It's just his representative career. He's just never dominated in it. And mind you, Johns didn't actually dominate the 2005 Origin series until he reached his 30s. Cleary isn't even at his prime age to play his best football yet, so that's scary. I've got no doubt that at the end of Nathan Cleary's career, he might overtake Jonathan Thurston and Cooper Cronk. Like, I think he'd overtake JT, and that's I just think realistically, Cleary's 26, 27 years old. He's probably got another 10 years of his career left in the Penrith Panthers number 7 jersey. Let's face it, he won't leave Penrith, I don't think. He'll be the long-term halfback and captain of that club. I just can't see him ever moving to Super League, and I just think he's just going to stay as a one-club player. And I think most of you would agree with me. Nathan Cleary, yeah, I just couldn't get him in. Every time I watch Origin, I just think, we need you here. We need you. Every time, even for the Ashes series, I just thought he didn't do much. Like, he needs to add more consistency to his representative career to be in the top 3. And what I really took into consideration is what the top 3 in my top 3 added in, not just their NRL career, but representative career in the Origin jersey, what JT Cooper Cronk did in Queensland, Australia, what Johns achieved for Australia, New South Wales. There was a consistent pattern towards their success in terms of their success in that jersey. Now, most of you are probably going to pull over the side of the road in the car right now, or if you're listening on Spotify, or you're going to drop your glass if you're watching me, glass of wine if you're watching me on YouTube. But Scott Prince, for me, is one of the most underrated halfbacks in rugby league history. Phenomenal halfback. We always look back at that 2005 grand final as with Benji Marshall's flick pass, him as the fancy player. What he achieved in that grand final, Benji Marshall, unbelievable. But Scott Prince got the Clive Churchill medal. It was Scott Prince's grand final. He was the conductor. He was the organiser. His kicking game in that grand final, phenomenal. He played a few games for Queensland in 2004. Goes to the Gold Coast Titans in 2007. They reach a prelim with Scott Prince at halfback and captain. And the only preliminary final the Titans have ever reached in 2010, which they lost to the Roosters to. Scott Prince, look, he was never going to be in my top 3 halfbacks, but I wanted to put him in as just a mention, as a bit of an outsider. A player that I don't think gets spoken about enough in his career. Suffered with a lot of injuries early on in his career, but managed a way to get back. Ended up going to the Broncos in 2013 and then retiring, I think, at the end of that season. But a terrific career to Scott Prince as well. All right, they're my top 3 halfbacks. Number 3, Cooper Cronk. Number 2, Jonathan Thurston. Number 1, Andrew Joey Johns. This is the Rugby League Forecast podcast. Please follow me on Spotify if you haven't already, and please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Cheers, guys.